I came home from work and found a chainsaw leaning against the splintered ruins of my cedar fence, and my neighbor Karen standing in the gap like she'd just won a prize, sipping a smoothie like she hadn't just carved a 10-foot hole into my property. She didn't even blink when I stopped the car, which I think is the real crime. No remorse, just confidence. "You're welcome," she said, like she'd done me a favor. "Now you can walk straight through instead of around." I looked at the gap, then at her, then at the scooter of a man named Common Sense, and realized he'd never show up for this neighborhood. I'm not a confrontational guy. I pay my taxes, I mow my lawn, I mind my business. But something about that smirk flipped a switch. I asked plainly, "Did you seriously chainsaw my fence for a shortcut?" She shrugged like she was explaining gravity. "It's not a backyard, it's shared open space. You just stuck a fence on it and pretended it was yours." She said the word pretended as if it were an accusation that required no evidence. My brain tried to compute the absurdity and failed slow and quiet methodical disbelief that felt almost religious. So I did the same thing. I documented everything and called the county. Turns out the survey from 1987 that sat in my files like a talisman said my fence sat fully on my land. Even better, the strip Karen had been using as a shortcut wasn't actually hers. Some mortgage shuffle from 2 owners ago had tacked a tiny parcel onto her property's records, but taxes had never been paid. That sliver had rolled back to the county and was headed for auction. I found that out, and yes, I cackled in my car like a cartoon villain, which felt a little wrong, but also frankly satisfying. For a while I kept quiet, let her keep strutting across what she believed was empire, while I quietly finalized ownership. She escalated parties, spilling onto my mulch string lights across the missing fence, a laminated private pathway, "Do not obstruct" sign planted in my flower bed. She flattened 2 of my hostess plants with one boot like it was a hobby. I photographed everything, saved every fragment. Then the deed arrived in the mail, the 10-foot strip legal and sealed right where she used to cut through. I hired a surveyor and a contractor not to build a flimsy replacement, but to build a wall tall and permitted and loud in its silence. She came back mid-afternoon and found a 6-foot wall with a bright blue sign, "Private property. No trespassing." The screaming was theatrical, the kind you only see in sitcoms. I handed her the deed folded neat inside a manila envelope. Her eyes flicked over it, and the smirk faltered. She tried to retake the narrative county inspector drainage path permits. Someone even dumped compost on my driveway one morning, a subtle, pungent taunt that smelled like desperation. Then she hired a lawyer who advertised on bus benches, one of those firms with a loud logo and small legal teeth. She threatened suit. I sent one polite page back: "You cut my fence, you trespassed, you ignored taxes. Future correspondence can be directed to my counsel." I didn't have counsel yet, but a bluff is a tool if you can hold it steady. But here's where it gets delicious, because it wasn't just about the strip. While digging through county records like a man possessed, I found a sleeping problem under Karen's house. The garage encroached on another tiny sliver of dormant county land forgotten after a title transfer in the 90s. The county declared it surplus and up for auction. I bought that too for less than the price of a decent microwave. Suddenly, the outer third of Karen's detached garage sat partly on land I owned. Quiet, legal, clean. Leverage. I didn't gloat publicly. I served a polite letter instead. Encroachment notice, 30 days to fix or negotiate a purchase. She showed up on my porch in a robe and slippers, mascara smeared like a war paint of exhaustion, and yelled, "You're harassing me," I told her calmly. "No. This is real estate." She tried a legal Hail Mary, adverse possession historical right-of-way, a complaint to the zoning board that read like a mashup of a real estate blog and an internet forum. I brought maps, surveys, notarized statements, even a previous owner's sworn note. The board took 12 minutes to deliberate. They denied her complaint unanimously. One board member chuckled. "Buying a smoothie doesn't entitle anyone to eminent domain," I nearly applauded. Of course, she didn't stop. She tried to weaponize the bureaucracy, submitting a fraudulent utility work order, claiming shared access, impersonating a parcel owner on forms, even having a crew show up to mark a gas line reroute. That was when I filed a police report for property fraud and impersonation. A detective followed up and found a trail of nuisance citations. Not violent crimes, but a pattern. The law started to smell like it might actually side with me. You could call it petty. You could call it justice. Either way, I played the long game. I bought the parcels that together formed a legal noose around her ability to pretend. I paid taxes on abandoned strips, I acquired titles, and I told neighbors nothing. People like quietness, I learned that. They hate spectacle. They prefer the slow, decisive cut that can't be undone by hissy fits. Then a developer knocked on my door offering 20 times what I'd paid for the sliver under her garage. I said yes on one condition: the garage would have to be cleared before construction. Suddenly there were men measuring and taking notes, an anonymous investor showing interest, and a flurry of activity that made Karen sweat in a way her smoothie never could. She put her house on the market at an inflated price with fine print referencing the minor encumbrance. Translation: she hoped some gullible buyer would take the mess and negotiate with me later. Bold, desperate, transparent. When she tried zoning reclassification to entice a big builder, I rallied neighbors folks she'd bothered before: the guy with the crooked flag, the family with a child who needed quiet, the woman across the street who'd been polite but tired of petty fights. We showed up at the zoning board in force. The developer's team stumbled answering questions about drainage setbacks, easement rights. The board delayed the decision. The developer left abruptly. Her listing vanished. A small U-Haul came. She packed what she could carry and left. For a moment I felt a flicker of pity, then relief. Of course, she'd filed a quiet title action before she left, hoping to retroactively claim the shortcut through adverse possession. I counterclaimed with a stack of evidence that would have made a librarian blush: timelines, photos, notarized letters, transcripts. The hearing was anticlimactic. The judge denied her claim, and when he asked why I'd named the fenced-off strip Karen's Shortcut Memorial Park, I told him simply, "It's a reminder that ignoring boundaries has consequences." A few people chuckled. He denied the claim on the spot. Finality didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like a long exhale, the quiet you get after the last guest leaves. The stereo turned off, the lights down. I walked to the bench I'd installed where her gnome once sat, and looked at the empty house across the street, the siding peeling, the bank signs in the window, the yard already reverting to weeds. The neighborhood started to heal, like someone had finally taken the splinter out. Neighbors brought folding chairs, cold drinks, lawn games. Someone made teas that read "Shortcut Survivor." It was oddly wholesome, an unplanned block party to celebrate normalcy. Months later, a bankruptcy notice from a law firm landed in my mailbox. Her list of assets read like a sad fiction garden: easements, exclusive access rights, a house she no longer owned. She had built a reality out of entitlement and shortcuts, and it crumbled. I never replied to the notice. There was nothing to say that wasn't a repeat. So what did I learn from all of this? Property lines are more than ink on a map. They're promises we make as neighbors about respect and limits. Patience and paperwork can outlast theatrics. The person yelling the loudest isn't always right. Sometimes she's just loud. And the weirdest thing I realized, I didn't hate Karen. What I felt was something softer and harder at once. Pity edged with clarity. She was desperate for control. When control slipped, she lashed out. She mistook force for ownership. In the end, I turned that 10-foot wound into a small, tidy place: gravel path, a bird feeder, a wooden arch carved by a neighbor that reads, "Boundaries make good neighbors." It wasn't a dig, it was the lesson I'd learned the hard way. I sat there one evening watching light slice through trees and felt something like closure settle over the block. Quiet victory. Not loud, not triumphant, just final. Here's the question I want you to chew on. When does protecting your property become something mean? When does standing up stop being defense and start being punishment? I did what I felt was right. She pushed. I pushed back, and the law, slow and clumsy but impartial, decided. Was I vindictive? Maybe. Was it fair? I think so. But what would you have done? If you've ever dealt with a neighbor like Karen, someone who treats other people's space like a personal obstacle course, tell me, did you litigate, negotiate, or quietly buy the land under their feet and watch the circus? Drop your story in the comments. And if this made you feel even a little bit satisfied, share it, because sometimes the quiet neighbor owns more than the morning paper. Sometimes he owns the land under your feet.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.